So our grip is mainly gonna consist out of a modified cylinder. Let's add a cylinder here to our scene, and I'm gonna put the radius to 20 millimeter and our depth to 120. And let's put the vertex count all the way down to 10 so that we keep it really low poly at the beginning, and then we just use our subdivision later on. So what I'm gonna do here is take these vertex points and scale them inwards a little bit. Same here on that side. That would be step 1 to get already a bit of this shape into place, and then I'm gonna rotate it by -25 degrees here. Let's put on local here for our transform in case you haven't already. That makes it a bit easier for what we're about to do, but let's just hide that upper part here for our revolver just so that we have this clear here. I'm gonna do a subdivision here in the center of it, and now with this local transformation we can bring that a bit more here into position as well as give it a bevel. So I'm gonna make another subdivision here at the top, and then with these faces here selected we want to extrude it out here, and then we can also give it a bit of a squeeze here. Now let's take these vertex points and I want to rotate them a little bit here as well as push them up, and this one here we can also rotate. So that makes it a bit easier then to read that shape later on. What I want to do is delete these faces here specifically, and then we can select these vertex points here, push it also a little bit up and into place, as well as over here and then here on the top. So that's why we keep it very low poly at the beginning, to make that easy to work with. And then later we're gonna subdivide that further. So down here, let's also do similar things. I'm gonna add a subdivision, and I wanna subdivide it actually 4 times. Now we can do the same thing here with our extrusion, as well as giving it a squeeze. And let's also do that over here. Push it back a bit. And then we have these faces here. And what we can do with that is push it up a bit here like that. And these ones we can bring further to the front. And because we're in X-ray mode, we select that on both sides, or we could just apply a mirror modifier, but sometimes it's easier to just, keep it as one piece. So we don't have to deal with the modifiers quite yet. So I'm just gonna position that all a little bit further. Here we can also have another subdivision to add a bit more of this curve. Let's connect that. And then a bit of fine tuning here. Over here, let's also make it a bit more high poly. Well, not really high poly, but adding some extra edge here to make that a bit more beveled. Let's also connect that. And then down here, let's see how we approach that in the best way. I want to first of all push these vertex points up here to the left, and then we can follow that silhouette a bit better. Let's join that here like that, these vertex points, and same as here. Now we have to take into account that it's doing a little bit of this curve there as well. Little bit of a bump. So we can just make perfect use here of our reference to get that silhouette right in the beginning. Individually moving these points around and try to have a nice and even space. in most parts. And now let's see what it looks like here with our subdivision applied. So adding that, you can see it's basically almost done, but we still have a little bit of extra work to do on it. So here's something a bit random, but I want to go over here to our theme preferences, and in here I want to switch that to Maya. I actually quite like that style, especially it makes it a bit easier for you to see the edges. But one thing I want to change is put the background type back to single color, and then I'm gonna put these values here, which is the same as it was before. So instead of having a gradient, we just leave it as it was basically. But another thing I want to do is change that wire color here to being black instead of this dark blue. I think that also suits it better, but that's completely customizable and up to you. So since we have our subdivision applied, we can now see in the background how the higher poly version looks like, as we still work here on that low poly with the blue lines. So that makes it easy here for us to work on that silhouette. And that's exactly what we want to do now. Get that as close as we can to match our reference image there. So that consists out of moving like individual vertices around here, such as for example here. We also want to match that with our background silhouette. And that way we can quickly create our grip here, which is very organic compared to the whole rest of the gun. So it's like a different approach as to the other elements where we're going to be using the remeasure. For this piece here, we can simply work with our subdivision level, and then later we're going to collapse it. So currently if I select an individual edge, it shows as white. And I'm actually not liking that because it's a bit hard to see here with our also light blue. So what I want to do is go back here to our themes, and this is really just for you basically, so that you better see what I'm doing. And I'm gonna change this active vertex and edge color to a green tone. So now this will show as green for like an individual edge. If we have multiple selected, it will remain this orange color. And I hope that will make it a bit easier for you to see the actions here as I select these edges and vertices. So then again, let's carry on here with working on that silhouette. Let's also take a look up here, and then keep in mind that we're actually looking at our final model there in the background, which has the subdivision on it. And this is just a convenient way here to move these parts around on a low poly version. That's why we were starting out with such a low poly cylinder. Let's also add a subdivision level down here, and let's make that a bit more edges down there to work with, so that we have this nice curve there. So speaking of the subdivision mode, let's just toggle it off for now so that we see better what we're doing here. I want to select this whole gap and fill it. And then let's select these two vertex points and join them. And the same up here. And then let's put an edge line here through the center, for which we can use our mirror. And let's put that to bisect. That will basically slice through it. Let's apply the mirror. It gives a warning, but it's nothing to worry about. Everything works the way it should. Now let's delete that other side so that we're only having one half here for the moment. Let's align it here with SZ0. And it looks like that because we already scaled it earlier. So it has a transformation, but it's not a problem because we're just going to rotate it like that. And basically we just want to make sure that these vertex and edges here are aligned. And now we can carry on by adding another subloop here and making that a bit more smooth here with that curve. So I also want to select these two vertex points here with a path. And then this vertex point, let's just drag that down a bit here, so that we have a bit more polygons to work with. Let's also connect this here. And then let's just dissolve this edge so that we have a nice quad there. Now I'm gonna push that a little bit already here to the outside. And then let's add our mirror back on to see what it looks like. And let's also apply our subdivision back on. So let's put that revolver piece back on so that we see how the grip actually looks on it. And what we can also do on the subdivision is to uncheck optimal display. So that way we really see how this is gonna look once we collapse it later on. Now these vertex points here, they are sticking out way too far. Let's push that further here to the inside. Let's do the same thing here on this edge. Let's push that a bit further to the inside. And then let's take a look at this curvature here, where right now is a little bit low poly looking there, or the intersection is just a bit too much. Let's put the transformation back to global to make that easier to select. And then on these vertex points, let's bring it a bit closer to where we have the metal structure of the revolver. And then with another edge loop, I'm gonna bring that up like this here, so that it's not so low poly up there. So you can see here at the back, it's very linear looking right now. And we don't want to have that looking like a brick. So what we're gonna do is use Alt and D. That will make an instance of the grip. And now we can rotate it around 90 degrees here, so that we see this part here of our reference image. So in order to get that nice curve in there, we can individually move some of these edges here. I'm gonna select these two edges here only, and then let's bring that in like that here. Let's also take a look at it with the subdivision on. And you can see we already get a bit more of an interesting shape now. Let's also select these edges here, and also let's bring that further here to the center to make that a bit more strong. We don't see the subdivision on the other part, but once we apply that there, it's gonna be the same because this is an instance of it. Now let's select these edges here, and let's bring that also further in. So this just makes it overall way more interesting looking as what we had before. And you can see here, once we select that piece, it will then also show it with a subdivision. So let's do a bit more tweaking on that. From the top, I'm gonna move these edges as well as these three vertices here. That's easier to do here from the top perspective. And then we can pull that back out a bit so that we have some space there where this intersects. And later we're gonna cut a little bit into it so that this looks like we have some space there as we see it on our reference image. So this one here, I'm gonna give a squeeze on that face. And now this one is a little bit too much in. I wanna push that back out here. Same here for this one. A bit of fine tuning Let's see here for this vertex, and let's push that one in to emphasize on this nice curvature here. And now this is already looking much better as to how we had it. Now what we have to consider here is that we have it currently overlapping with this other piece. We're gonna fix that in a moment. Let's prepare this for that by making a bit more space up here. Over there it's a little bit more sticking out to have a nice grip on it. And then here at the bottom we can make that a bit more smooth here, that transition of that curve. And maybe these three edges we can also push in a bit. So this one here too, let's make that more smooth with the overall edge flow. And same here on individual points. So let's take a look at it from different angles and compare it with our reference images. And let's go back here in edit mode to this low poly version where it's easier then to control the edges. And let's change that a little bit here with the edge flow. This here we can push a little bit further to the front. And over here on that upper part, I'm actually gonna dissolve this edge here, or these edges, and instead we can take this loop that we already have there, bring that up here, and now let's push these vertex points a little bit further here to the right side. And also we can add an edge loop here into the center like that. Let's connect that here. We just need to have a few more extra polygons there. So that's why we can make a simple division through that in order to get this. Let's select these upper edges and push it a bit further to the center. So slowly it's shaping up here. Let's go back here to the bottom, and maybe we want to push it a little bit out actually. Make that a little bit more thick there. And yeah, sometimes you just see me rotating around here in the viewport, and this is just like something important to always have a look at our silhouette. And for that we want to look at it from different angles from time to time. Let's go back to this part here and let's give it a bevel, and if you look at the edge at the bottom, let's aim for it so that this aligns here with this other piece. And now we can make a connection over here and dissolve this edge. So that way we have this a bit more structured there. And then just a bit more of alignment. And then what we want to do is increase the resolution here on the subdivision so that we see what our final high poly will look like, because we're gonna increase the subdivision on it then. So that reveals that over here we want to position that a bit better according to our reference image in the background, even though it might be a little bit difficult to see. But we want to have this outline matching the reference as close as possible here. So we may have to toggle between the X-ray mode and the solid mode a few times. And then we have an intersection here that we want to take care of. This whole trigger guard should be on its own, and we don't want to have any obvious intersections. So now let's put the resolution back to 1 here on that grip on our subdivision level, and let's hide the reference image, and we can delete that instance here. Now let's go to the subdivision modifier and let's collapse that down. So now what we want to do is make an edge selection here, and let's start here. I think it's the 7th edge from the bottom, if you want to count it. And then if we press Control, we can make a selection here upwards, basically. And if we press Shift, we can make multiple ones. Let's do that until this point here. And now we want to align that. So SX0 to align that on the X-axis, and you can see it's already almost exactly where we want it to be here, aligned against this element here of the other part. Let's just push it a little bit further to the left. So now with that in place, let's zoom in here on that region and let's push these edges a little bit further up here as well. And now let's select this edge. And then let's go over here to the X-ray mode, and with Shift we can make a selection for all these edges here, and we're gonna add a few more to it all the way down here, and then we're gonna right click that and say subdivide. So now let's select this edge loop here, and then let's also align that on X. S, X and 0, and then let's push it carefully here to the left. So now with that, let's just connect these vertex points here with an edge. And on the other side, it looks a little bit messy now because of the alignment. Let's select these edges here at the bottom, these two, and let's simply dissolve them. So now with that vertex point, let's just connect that over here to the left side. And then let's drag that a little bit further inside. So now what we want to do is select these faces wherever we did an alignment. Let's do this row here first. Let's get out of isolation mode and then all the way down to here where we started with the first edge alignment. And then we're gonna hit X and delete these faces. And now let's also do this row here, all the way down to here, and you can see that this is perfectly aligned to where we have the revolver. We could have, of course, also done that as a Boolean operation, but I think it's just easier to directly control which faces we're gonna delete here. So let's shade smooth it. And now, of course, what we have to do is to fill the empty space somehow. And in order to do that, we're gonna select some of these edges here. I mean, we have to select all of them, but first let's select these here and let's extrude to the inside. And then we can carry on making a selection from this edge over to this edge, and let's fill that. And then the upper part, we can also make a circle select. Basically one that goes all the way around, and also fill it. This here, maybe we want to optimize a bit more, push it to the left side so that it's not so dense there. And then let's also connect that. So here at the front, let's start with this edge, and then with Control we make the whole loop to this point and also extrude it in a little bit. Now on that side, let's select these edges that we have here. And let's bridge that over to the other side. Let's dissolve this vertex. And then on that side, let's make a loop again here for this. Extrude, snap back. Then we drag it out here on the x-axis, align it, SX0. And then here we put it to 0 on the x coordinate. So that way we're not wasting so much space there, but we have some depth. Let's do the same thing here. Extrude that loop out, snap back and put to 0. And then we can go over here to our snapping and snap this vertex point into place there. So now same thing here on these two edges. Let's extrude it out, snap back. And then we can put it to 0 after we aligned it on the x-axis. I had the snapping on, that's why it looked a little bit strange. It was snapping against some of the other parts. But now we can go over here in vertex mode. Let's give everything a target weld, and 4 vertices had to be welded on my end. Everything else looks fine, so let's go over to select sharp edges here. And I want to increase that sharpness angle to around 70, and let's see what that gives us here. I want to select everything that's a sharp edge here on the inside. I'm gonna add these edges here to it with Shift, as well as down here. And then you can see it better once I put the bevel weight on it. So everything that shows blue is now part of our bevel weighted edges. And that means that we can work with the bevel modifier as well as the subdivision. And we're gonna make a nice high poly out of it. So let's put the bevel on. And by default, that always looks a little bit messed up. So let's go into the settings. And I'm gonna put the segments down to 1. And most importantly here, our distance or the offset. Let's see with 0.3. That looks pretty good. Now let's put that also to weight mode here. So that way it actually only works on the weighted edges that we were just applying it to. And then let's apply a subdivision surface. And now we have it nice and beveled here around these edges. Let's put that resolution up around 2 here. This is probably what we're gonna export it as a high poly with later on. And now let's select these vertex points and let's make that a little bit better. Let me undo that and let's get out of the snapping for that. And now we can do a better job here, aligning that with the other geometry that we have there. Same here. And just a little bit so that this is not so offset from the other part. Now here we have a bit of an issue. First thing I want to do is delete these vertices there at the bottom. They were sticking out a bit too much when we originally made it. So we can just delete that segment. And then we can connect that here after we filled it back up. Now what we can also do is select these vertex points here and push it quite a bit here to the right side so that we still have this geometry, but we don't need to be using so much for it here as a texture space. Now let's select these points and let's drag that a little bit in here. So the same here on these vertex points. Let's drag them a little bit further in here. And then let's select it and let's see what it looks like without our subdivision if we toggle that off, because that basically is going to be our low poly later on. And without our bevel, and we don't see anything sticking out, so let's re-enable it. And that pretty much makes that grip here now. So now we got to copy a screw at the bottom of the grip. And for that, we're going to take this screw that we have and rotate it so that this is perfectly horizontal. And just in case you wonder, I already mentioned it earlier, anything that involves this type of a screw here, you don't have to worry about if you didn't follow the part earlier. We're gonna make that in Substance Painter later on. So even if I add it here now, we are gonna actually delete it later in the tutorial for anything that involves these screws. And then we're gonna make that in a better way in Substance Painter. But if you wanna follow, I'm not gonna cut it out and I'm gonna have to put that here to X0, this screw, and then we can scale it up. The reason why it should point perfectly horizontal, that screw, is that we're only gonna use 1/2 later in the texture of that grip. And that's why we can't afford to have any butterfly effect if that screw was somehow tilted a little bit with this dent. So this is why it has to look like that here. So let's actually go back to the grip once more. And if you look at the reference image, that plastic part of the grip should be more round. So I'm gonna dissolve these two edges here, and that makes it easier then to select this edge and give it a nice bevel. So let's put a few segments on that. I have 4 segments, and now we can connect that up here. And maybe we have to adjust that a little bit where it's sticking out now. But overall, it's looking okay. Without the subdivision, we have nothing sticking out. So then what we can work on next is the rear side. And for that, let's add a cylinder to our scene. And let's keep it at 32 edges, and let's put the radius down to 4. I'm gonna put the depth to 20 millimeter, and then we can already rotate it here on the Y rotation. Now let's take a look at this here from our back view, and it looks like the 20 millimeters is a bit too much. Let's see with 17, and now this fits pretty good here. This piece has around the same width as the part of the revolver where we now build it on top of it. So let's position that here. It doesn't matter if it's intersecting a little bit because it's sticking slightly over anyway to the sides, as we can see here in the reference image. And now let's create this detail that we see there. And this we're not going to do in Substance Painter, so make sure to follow that one. This is not one of these screws. So I'm gonna make a copy of that face, snap it back, separate it out, and make a quick origin on it. So now we have that here to work with. We can scale it down, and let's make one of these floating details there in the background. Same way we approached it before, but a little bit different looking. So we can start by making an inset again here. Then I want to make a ring selection on that, add a subdivision, which we then gonna pull further here to the left side. And then back to that piece here. Let's make another inset on that, followed by another one. And then same thing here. Let's make a subdivision on that part, and let's push that here to the left side. So now with that face, let's carry on with some more inset. This one I'm gonna drag in like that here on the main face. Let's add a subdivision to this ring selection, and then another subdivision to this part here. And with these edges, let's give it a bit of a curvy shape here by pushing that to the front. Now I want to bevel that part here at the back of it. And now we're gonna select these faces here on both sides. And then we're gonna delete that selection. And then once we get back to our edge mode, we're gonna make a loop selection here around all these gaps, fill it back up. And then with that active selection, we can extrude it. So let's extrude that, and now let's align it on the x-axis. And then we got a little bit of a cleanup to do here by dissolving these edges that we don't need to have there. So that makes it a bit easier then to clean that up. And on these parts, let's select them and let's give them a bevel. So let's add a few subdivisions to that. I have 5 segments. And that way this looks already a bit more interesting. Let's put the bevel on it with an offset of 0.1. The bevel modifier as well as a subdivision surface. So now if we compare that with our reference image, we have this nice detail here, and let's just select the outer loop and scale it up a bit. So here we can see the reference. Maybe scale it down a slight bit. So next I'm gonna switch over here to our other side of the revolver. And then I want to copy this screw up here. But then again, I'm gonna actually delete it later. I just need to mention it so that you don't get confused. But now I'm just gonna copy that over here for now. And basically have that in here until later, where we're gonna get rid of this detail. And while I'm at it, I'm making sure that this is centered here on that part, as according to our reference image. But then it turns out this is easier to do in Substance Painter later on. So regardless of that, we're gonna now also continue working here on that shape. So this part is definitely essential to follow. It's really only for the parts where we have this screw that you can pretty much ignore it, because these are better to be done in Painter. So I'm gonna connect it like that here. Let's join these edges like that. And then I'm gonna make a loop selection here through the whole cylinder. And I want to make a bevel like this here on that. The reason is that we have a little bit of this gap there at the upper side of it. So with this current selection, let's bring up Ctrl A and let's assign rotation and scale here to reset that back to default. Next, I'm gonna put the mirror modifier on, and I wanna put a bisect on that here, as well as flipping it on the x-axis. Let's confirm that. So that way we have a slice through the center there. And that's what we need in a moment. So next, I'm gonna take these vertex points and let's just delete the left side of it. Let's then make a selection here for the whole open part. And let's extrude it out, snap back and bring forward, followed by another extrusion where we do the same thing. So that way we already have some edge loops here in place. We can then fill that up here and connect it like this. Let's go into the X-ray mode and also connect these vertex points here. And then we can dissolve these two edges here. Let's dissolve that, and that way we already have this shape here pretty much in place. So due to the mirror modifier, we somehow lost our quick origin, which got reset back here to 0, X, Y, and Z. Let's add that quick origin to our favorites so that we can easier access it. I'm gonna right click it and say add to quick favorites. And then let's put the origin back into the center here of that object, simply by using the quick favorites, which by default I think is under Q, but I put it onto Alt Q. So here you can see where you have it. So with Alt D, I'm gonna make a duplicate now of this. Not Shift D, but Alt D. So that way we have an instance, a duplicated instance, and that means we can now put that into position here. And if we do changes to it here, we're gonna apply it also to the other part. And that makes it easier to see on our other reference part there, what we're doing at the top of it. Now on that object, I'm gonna extrude these faces out, snap it back, and then we can push it out here to the left side and align it S, Y, and 0 on the y-axis. And then we might want to switch back here to this piece at the top of it again, so that we see better how this curve here is forming up. Let's make another ring selection here and then right-click Subdivide. And on this loop, let's make a bevel here. Somewhere around there, so that this is matching here with the reference image, where we have a little bit of this offset. So then we can go back to that one. It's a little bit of jumping around from piece to piece, a little bit annoying, but it makes it easier to see it on our reference images. And now I'm gonna extrude only that part out here with this selection. And it goes pretty much all the way through until around that part here. So we can compare it here on this reference image. This is where that ends. And since we don't really see that here because we have the rail, I was sort of like eyeballing that. But it's very close. So now let's take these vertex points and then we're gonna push these verts a little bit here to the right side to make sure we get that angle there. And now let's select the edges here at that corner. And if you remember that reference image, this is supposed to be round. So let's have 5 segments on each side. And now we already get the basic shape here in place. What we can do now is make use of these vertex points that we already have in place here. And let's make connections here like that on both sides. And then we can delete this whole segment here when we go in face mode. Delete these faces and then let's make a selection for it and let's fill it back up. So now let's connect it like this here. And let's just take it into isolation mode so that we see better what's going on. I want to also delete these faces here because we actually have a bit of a gap there. So I'm gonna extrude these edges out here instead, align it, and then we can go over here, push it to the right side, go into the snap mode, and let's just snap it here where this is supposed to connect. I'm gonna merge it by distance, fill this part up here, and then later we can just mirror it over to the other side. But before we do that, let's give this one here a bevel. So I'm gonna be a bit more generous here. Let's give it 3 segments. And then let's do a bit of optimization here already. So we have this edge loop here that we can get rid of. I'm gonna select it, and then if we select it all the way through, it also selects these parts which I wanna get rid of with Control. Everything else we can dissolve, then make some connections here. And also here, let's get rid of that. So by getting rid of, I mean often just to dissolve it, because it's unnecessary edges that don't really contribute anything to the rest of the model. And this is then a part of the optimization to dissolve that. So let's take another look around here, and now let's just work on this detail. I'm gonna select these faces here and let's delete it. Let's fill that back up, and then let's go to X-ray mode and join these vertex points here so that we have this gap here. Let me get out of the isolation mode, and then let's carefully bring that up. Let me just get out of snapping before I do that. So let's put it around here. And also here on that side, maybe we can push it up a little bit further. So that way we have more space here for this screw detail in the normal map later on, which ultimately we're gonna do in Substance Painter. So let's carry on here. I want to actually delete this instance now. It served its purpose. Let's just go back here to that piece now. And let's do a little bit more of the optimization here, where we have some edges that we can also dissolve and then clear that up to have more space for better connections. So later we're gonna also use the symmetry modifier on it, so we're only focusing on this one side here, in case you've been wondering. Let's connect this here like that, and then let's take this one here on the left side to the upper corner. And then I'm gonna do an inset here on this, collapse that, and that way we saved some time. Don't have to individually connect everything. Now let's just merge by distance. So that way we have that welded where we were just snapping it to. And this one here also requires a bit of a connection as well as here at the front. And then once we have that, we can mirror it over to the other side. But before I do that, I'm gonna have to explain something once more about the JMesh tool. So I'm just gonna add a freeze frame here once more, and it's because of the latest version of JMesh, which, as I already told you, it doesn't have the quick mirror anymore. So throughout the creation of the tutorial, I was upgrading to that plugin, and then I figured, well, I'm gonna stick with it. But then later I actually emailed the creator and he let me know that he wants to bring that back as a feature with a quick mirror. So it's definitely worth checking for that. And meanwhile, I'm just gonna be using the mirror modifier to do these mirror actions. There's only one bug with it, which is that the quick origin point always gets reset to X, Y, and Z 0. So I only found that out later that this is what causes it. So JMesh is an absolutely awesome plugin and I'm gonna continue using it, but sometimes it can also lead to some problems where maybe there are some bugs in it or some features are disappearing. So this is something that I will have to consider for future tutorials, but for now I'm just gonna give you the heads up and we can carry on. So I'm gonna add the mirror modifier on the X. And then in the settings, I'm gonna put it to bisect and to flip. So that way it works accordingly here. And now I want to do some snapping here on that side. What I want to do is zoom in on that part here. And first of all, let's dissolve these edges here on that segment. So now it might look a little weird, but let's snap it to this point here. So that way we have this actually where we want it to be. Let's merge it now. That removes one vertex point. Then we can merge that over here. And I'm gonna apply the mirror modifier now so that we have it as one piece here. And then we can add this edge here at the bottom. So I also want to take another look at the reference in order to sort out some of these remaining details, such as putting a curvature here. First, let me dissolve these edges here, as well as these here. We just want to clear that up so that our bevel modifier doesn't create too much of a mess. So let's give it a decent amount of segments here. I'm gonna have 6 segments on that, and then we can scale it a little bit, as well as pushing it over here on the y-axis to the right side. And then let's just select everything and also pull it a little bit over here to the right side. Let me go back into the isolation mode again. And then let's do some connections here. We can also select two at the same time. So that way we have this here already a bit more cleaned up. And then I'm gonna put the mirror modifier back on, and same as before, bisect as well as flip to the other side. So let's get out of the isolation mode, and then let's give it another target weld on everything. Switch over to vertex mode and merge by distance. Two vertices were found. And now we have quite a bit of faces that are basically never seen because they're sticking in here. So what I want to do is first of all get out of the snapping mode and then simply drag it up like this here. Let's get out of the X-ray mode so that we can see how much we should drag that up. We still want it to be sort of like intersecting into the mesh, but not as far down as it was. So I'm gonna also add a subdivision here and then drag these edges further up. And let's just connect it like this here. So that way we also took care of that here. And then let's select these faces and I wanna widen that up a bit here. As a next thing, let's select the faces that we have there, at least on one side. So here, these three faces, and then we're gonna make a Shift D copy of it, snap back into place and separate it out, and that will also apply the mirror modifier because it's based on the same object where we had it on before. I'm gonna put the quick origin in the center here of these vertex points. And then what we can do is flip our normals. So that way they actually point into the right direction, which will become more clear once we drag it up here like that. So we have to take the perspective into account there for that reference image. But now we can fill it up here like that. And then I'm gonna add a subdivision here, which we can use to quickly add these details that we have there. Let's bring that up a bit here. And then on that ring, let's also add a subdivision. Now let's bring that further here to the center. And then I'm just gonna put on what we have here, our front side, so that we get a bit of an idea what we're looking through later on. And I actually want to push it up a bit for that. And here on these vertex points, slightly bring it down a slight bit. Now we can take these faces and delete them, and then we're just gonna join it over here or fill it over here. So then let's go over to this one and let's give it a few subdivisions here or segments so that we have this nice and round. And now I want to select these and push it in a bit. That's what I see on our reference. It's not perfectly aligned, but it's sticking in there, sort of tucked in. So now, same as usual, let's also think of our vertex connections here. Let's clean that up. And we can get rid of this loop here because that contributes nothing to our edge flow. Oh, and here I got a message from my brother. I didn't notice this when I recorded it. And then once again, I'm gonna copy these screws now. You can pretty much ignore that. You're probably already tired of hearing it, but I just have to mention it so that you don't get confused. So according to our reference image, I'm positioning them here on top of our rear side. And here on the reference image, you can see it. The first one is here, and I'm scaling it up a bit now. And then I position it here as a floating detail. And this part here, this one we're definitely gonna keep later. So I want to position that a little bit closer as well as scaling it up. So let's make sure it doesn't intersect. But that way this is a bit bigger, makes it more interesting also on our normal map. And then I copy this screw one more time by hiding this element. And I copy it, snap back, and bring it here to the front. So I have it around here. And then it also needs a bit of a scale. And then this part here is pretty much taken care of. I'm scaling that up a bit here, as well as bringing that down. And like I said before, I didn't want to cut these parts out because I feel like it's been all a part of this tutorial, whether I decide to delete it later or not. But in that case, I changed my mind later, and this is something that happens through 3D modeling. We sometimes have to change our mind. What I want to do now on that piece is make a copy here of this segment, separate it out and push it over here. And now we can position it here pretty much into place where we want to have this detail added onto our iron sight as seen on the reference. For that, I'm gonna fill both of the ends, the front and the back. And then we can make a Boolean operation here with the JMesh tool. And let's pick that. And then let's go into the difference mode. So with that in place, what we can do is give it a bit of a scale. So then what we can do is apply our mirror first of all on that element. And we just want to make sure it's only applied here to that front side, not at the back, but then we can apply it. And now our smoothing is a little messed up. Right click and smooth didn't work, so let's go over here to these properties and apply auto smooth. So let's take that into isolation and let's put the quick origin back to the center here. So now we have to do a little bit of cleanup, and I'm just going to delete the right side for that, as we used to do before. So we could also just leave the mirror on, now that I think about it, but I'm just gonna have it off and as one segment only, and then we put that back on. Let me use the target snap here for that on the vertex mode. As well as here, let's snap that. And then this one, let's connect it over here. So let's select everything and merge. And now with the default threshold, it merged more together than we wanted. So I'm gonna undo that and then merge with a smaller threshold, which removes around 5 vertices. So now we can put the mirror back on the x-axis. And you can see how our quick origin gets reset when we apply that, but at least we know why, and it's not really a big problem and an easy fix.